February 1990. "Since you told me you wanted to move to Manhattan, I thought you should know," said my friend Abby. Abby had been looking for an apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan for months. Now that she had found one, it appeared she couldn't kick her apartment searching habit. You see, coming to Manhattan is almost like getting high for the first time. You experience the city from afar. Perhaps you commute to work. Maybe you come for the occasional play or nightclub. Perhaps you were a young student going off to college in the Big Apple. It really doesn't matter. Once you have had your first shot of New York, you want to recapture the thrill, the jolt you got when you first got high on the city. And so it was with Abby. She needed more. She needed to live there. So she went apartment hunting, looking through ads, checking with friends, watching the bulletin boards at health clubs or houses of worship, trying to score the ultimate high in Manhattan, an affordable apartment on the Upper West Side. Apartments are not cheap. I had seen spaces not much bigger than my bedroom in my parents' house in New Jersey going for close to $1,000 a month. Still, I had vowed to move out if I had A. made so much money that I needed to buy a house or a condo as a tax deduction, B. got married, C. reached my 30th birthday before the above had occurred. While I was gainfully employed, buying a house was still an expensive proposition and, in truth, illogical for a bachelor who would have to commute to the city every day. A condo or co-op might have been possible, but also expensive and potentially hard to unload. At any rate, it would be better to test the waters rather than to plunge in. Marriage, while desirable, didn't seem forthcoming, an excellent reason in itself to move to the West Side. Number 30, however, was 9 months away, and while I hadn't planned to start looking just yet, given the apartment situation in Manhattan, or lack thereof, it made sense to check out Abby's discoveries. Abby had noticed 3 postings on the bulletin board of her synagogue. One, on 96th Street and Broadway, was being leased by a doctor for $750 a month. Upon investigation, it turned out that the good doctor was using the apartment as an office. She would have been happy to lease it to me if I were willing to stay away until 8 o'clock each weeknight. I could, however, have the place to myself on weekends, barring any medical emergency, of course. He pointed out to me that an exam table was a very comfortable place to sleep. When I inquired what I would do if I wanted to bring a girl home, he responded by pulling a pair of stirrups out of the table. The second one was in the 60s in a development called Lincoln Towers. A girl Abby knew was leaving for Israel sometime in the future and wanted to sublet her studio co-op for $1,000 a month. A little out of my budget, but worth looking at, if for no other reason that it contained a Murphy bed. And outside of the movies, when the beds inevitably closed with someone sleeping in them, I had never seen one. I entered the apartment. It was nicely furnished, although it had a bit too much of a woman's touch for my taste. The color pink was abundant, frilly sheets lay over the Murphy bed, and there were stuffed animals all over. Still, it was pleasant, although a bit disappointing. Not once had the Murphy bed ever closed while someone was sleeping on it. Now there went a perfectly good party idea out the window. The third apartment was being advertised by a broker named Joseph, who before anything else informed me that his fee for finding the apartment would be $600. The apartment was on the 14th floor. It was being subleased for $750 per month. "One thing you should know, my friend," said Joseph. "The man you'd be leasing from, he married the woman in the apartment next door. She has a larger apartment and nicer apartment, so he moved in with her. But he wants to keep his stocks and bonds in a cabinet in the apartment you would be leasing. So you would have to let him in once a month." This seemed very strange, even for New York, but it was an apartment, it had a bedroom, it came furnished, it was on 96th Street, a good location for me, and the price sounded right. So let's have a look. I met Joseph, a man in his late 60s, or more likely in his early 70s. The building was not new, but it was reasonably kept. It stood 17 stories high, and while it had no doorman, it had a manually run elevator, which, in addition to the elevator man, contained an attractive young lady named Rachel. "I'm going to do my laundry," she explained. Then she gave Joseph a quick embrace. Obviously, she knew him. I couldn't help but wonder. Could this meeting have been planned? Perhaps Joseph had arranged for the young lady to be in the elevator at that exact moment so that I'd be more inclined to take the apartment. Well, if that was his plan, I'll have you know in no uncertain terms, It was working. We arrived at the apartment of Mr. and Mrs. Morris Hallen, an elderly Jewish couple. I was warmly greeted. They were nice people. Mrs. Hallen made sure that I knew that if I ever needed help or a meal, I would be welcome. After a few minutes, I began to wonder if I were coming to see an apartment or getting adopted. The apartment was lovely. The kitchen had a full 4-burner stove with an oven and a broiler. All right, that's standards for most kitchens, but not in New York. What's more, the kitchen had an eating area and a small table. Actually, the table looked more like one of those large spools that telephone cables come on, standing on an oriental rug. There were windows galore, and I tried to imagine the sunlight gently falling on me in the morning as I awoke. It was a high floor, and by a stretch of luck, there was a playground directly across the street from me rather than a high-rise. This allowed me a complete and unobstructed view of the high-rise that was 2 blocks away from me. But there was more than that. I could easily make out the neighborhood RKO video store, with its bright flashing lights. I had a safe view of the streets. Perhaps someday I would witness a mugging or a traffic accident. Maybe I would see some overzealous traffic department tow truck abducting an innocent vehicle that was still in its parking spot 55 seconds after the meter had expired. Yes, I could see all of this, and from a safe distance. Or at least a relatively safe distance. This was, after all, New York. I walked into the bedroom. There were 2 dressers, 2 beds, disguised as couches, 2 windows, and 2 pieces of shelving furniture, all sitting on a pretty, if slightly dirty, Persian rug. Only 1 air conditioner, but that would be plenty. It also had 2 closets, which was important because Mr. Hallen had decided that he needed the 2 that were in the hallway. He also decided that he needed the living room more than once a month. "I must have it all the time," he announced. "But you won't really need it that often," whined Joseph. "Yes, but I want to have it. This is my work area." He smiled pleasantly. "I am retired now, but I work harder than ever." He said this with a certain pride in his voice. He then proceeded to give me a history of an engineering career that had taken him from Eastern Europe to the Arctic with the U.S. Army during World War II. Down to brass tacks, the heated negotiations. Joseph argued that I should get more consideration. "He's a minority," the broker pointed out. I'm not sure what he meant by that. Either I was the only Native American in the room, or perhaps the only person under 60. An agreement was finally reached. Mr. Hallen got the living room and the closets. However, if my parents came to visit, they could stay in the living room. I stopped to consider the likelihood of my parents leaving their comfortable suburban home in New Jersey to stay on the small guest bed in the living room. Somehow I was quite sure that this was one privilege I would not abuse. Still, I had a bedroom, a kitchen, the views, furniture, and Mrs. Hallen's promise that she would arrange the bedroom so that I would have enough space for everything. She also informed me that if I needed anything, especially a meal, I should not hesitate to call. But what I also had, for the first time in my life, was a home of my own. The elevator door snapped back, and I began my descent. A light flashed, and the elevator operator smoothly brought the elevator to a stop. Another attractive young woman entered. She was wearing a colored T-shirt and blue sweatpants with the letters NBC on them. These were not her initials. Her face, although not the movie star type, had an abundant pleasantness to it. When she smiled, it did not matter that half the light bulbs in the elevator were not functioning, and the remaining ones were about half the wattage they should have been. Her voluptuous brown hair surrounded her face, stopping just above her shoulders. Her 5'5" figure was modestly shapely and alluring, although not so much as that wonderful smile. "I'm going to pick up my laundry," she said. During our brief descent, I learned that her name was Bonnie, and that she was an accountant for NBC. Had the building been larger, who knows what might have developed? But we reached the lobby before I could learn any more about her. I left not knowing her phone number, her apartment, or even her last name. She was simply Bonnie, the girl with the laundry, in the elevator. That night, I made a decision. As soon as I moved in, I would be doing a lot of laundry.